Hey everyone, it's Nicole and Shane from Wicky. We have there's no number anymore. It's the recap of the BBL Supercoach season. Obviously, the BBL Finals start today on Friday. Supercoach season is done. Shit way for it to finish with the rain, unfortunately, on Wednesday. But I think before we get into everything, we are going to talk about BBL Finals really quickly. But so Shane, do you want to go through quickly how your team went, or should we go through the finals first and then get into the
You
procession of the recap?
can we delay the misery a little bit and just talk about the
Yeah,
finals first?
let's do that. Let's do that. Well, just one quick thing from me. Yesterday I looked at the forecast for Gold Coast, which is where the first final's been played, and it's been pissing down for days. It was meant to be pissing down, and potentially the game being called off or shortened. But the forecast looks really good, so we should be on track to have a final series without any rain interruptions, which would be really really nice. I did a podcast with Scott Bailey from the AAP this morning, sort of purely just talking about the BBL finals. So I'll save my predictions for maybe just after yours. But what's your take on the BBL finals, Shane?
I would have just loved to have said that Scotch is going to win. Uh, it's just I feel a little bit less sure now that they lost at home against the Sixers in that ridiculous run chase. Dan Hughes turned out to be the hero. Um, I it sucks that I think every team's going to be losing players, which is a pity. I would have said that the Heat would have been a lot stronger favorites with Colin Munro and having their captain there and Sam Billings in the middle, who's had a few good innings. Um, surely the strikers have a chance. Like surely match out on this form. We've seen how far like a single gun player can take a team. But the strikers themselves, I think, are also losing like a couple of players. Chris Lynn's going
Hose,
through like a
Overton,
couple of
and
really
Lynn.
strong players. Yeah, Overton and Lynn, and Overton's been so good this season. Chris Lynn's been vital at that number three position. Um, I don't think Short can do it on his own. I think sadly, those two were a very important part of their team. I think who are the Scorchers losing? Are they losing Laurie Evans? Um,
Scorchers lose Evans, Crawley, and Eskenazi through injury, and they're already missing Turner and Jai Richardson.
yes, Turner and Richardson, right? I think they might actually be able to do it. I think it might be um, Scorchers. I think Scorchers might be able to do it. It's just like I think the only one Sixers are losing is James Vince, right? Um,
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if that'll play a part because um Sixers like they are the team least likely to be like they'll face the least disruptions. Knowing how good Laurie Evans has been for Perth, like that's definitely a big miss in the middle order. Sixers just yeah, like they actually have the minimal like the least disruption to their team. Vince is definitely a loss who but he's not been great this season outside of a couple of scores, and he's the most replaceable of the losses that across all teams that have suffered. So many words to just say. I think it's going to be either Scorchers or Sixers.
Okay, sure. The way that I played it out this morning when we were talking about it was I went through two scenarios. I went through the scenario of, well, look, I thought at that point it was going to rain, right? So if I take the rain out, I do think the Sixers are the better team as it is, as you just said, least disruptions. I hate admitting that though, because I usually go for the score to beat the Sixers in BBL finals. But let's just say the Sixers do win, which means that they go straight to the SCG and with all the disruptions, I don't care who comes up against them. Sixers at the SCG, I just think will win the BBL final. If they lose, though, they will have a home final against the Scorchers or the Strikers, who have way more disruptions and a way weaker team in the final. So again, I think the Sixers will win that, and then they get a second crack at the Heat at Carrara if that's the case. And I again just think their experience and their leadership, etc., will take them over the line. So unfortunately, I do think that the Sixers will win it. The only scenario I can imagine the Heat winning it in is if obviously if they can get done today because they get straight to the home like final playing at home. I do think Carrara takes the Sixers added the game just a little bit because our analysis showed that it's a second worst ground in Australia for spin bowlers. So I think like if the Heat can pull it off today, then they're in a really good position because I don't think the Scorchers and the Strikers are as good as the Sixers. So if they do play the
Mm,
Sixers, you've got Stephen O'Keefe and Murphy, and that sort of takes away the edge a little bit. And the Heat do have their pace attack intact. So I think like today, if it
mm,
has been raining for a few days, the pitch is fresh and conducive to movement. I think the Heat are in a really good spot. So that's how I read it.
mm.
Unfortunately, most likely, I think the Sixers are going to win it. So yeah, pretty
Yeah.
boring previews, I guess, of the
Yeah.
finals.
No, I was just gonna say you mentioned that the Finals spin and the neutralizes Todd Murphy and so on, but he'd also have a couple of spinners like a very important. It's a very important part of their bowling attack. 8 overs a spin from Swepson and Kuhneman. I'm just sort of looking
Mm,
up the numbers on a portal right now. It's not great for either. Um, they don't have it's also tough to say, I think, because they haven't played a ton of cricket there recently. So
mm.
maybe let's not draw too many conclusions about how Swepson and Kuhlman will go. But if it's true that this is the ground where spinners tend to struggle, I think um, it's not just going to be the Sixers who are affected.
Yes, and one last thing, I was just going to say something. The other thing that really strikes me is that with the strikers, I think they're clearly sort of like half a rung below the other three teams, and they've lost the guts of their team. Lynn overturned two key players. Ho's only had a couple of sort of meaningful contributions this year, but that really is a big loss. And then what that leaves of their batting order minus Matt Short is like truly lesser than what they had. And then also you look at the Scorchers. I usually love following the Scorchers in the finals in the Big Bash, but then you've taken out Turner and Richardson, two of their sort of long-standing gun players, Crawley, Eskenazi, and Laurie Evans, who's been a freak this year. And then the Heat have lost Marnus and Uzi, who I know only played a couple of games, but then also Billings and Munro. And what they're left with is, I think we said Josh Brown, Pearson, McSweeney, Renshaw, Max Bryant, and that's just in finals
Good.
games. It's just noticeably not as good as that Sixers consistent sort of title winning team. So yeah, I think I do love going the other option when we do these predictions, but unfortunately everything points to a Sixers title again.
And so are you saying that Jake Weatherall's not up to the task? He's slotted
Yeah,
in number three, killing it. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say with Weatherald, like everyone had wrote him off, including myself. Like he hasn't done well really
Same.
consistently for years. And then I said on the podcast this morning actually that I was chatting to you guys on Discord and Facebook groups or whatever with the Wiki sort of community. And whilst we were laughing at how bad I think it was Dooley was going that day and how good was Weatherald was going, before we knew what was going on, the game was over. Like it was actually somewhat in the balance, and out of nowhere, the game was over.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. Well, whether like the shots he was playing was
Mm.
just genuinely incredible. But just one thing I forgot to say at the start: if you Google Wiki Linktree, obviously the stuff that we're doing now, the podcast, the data tools, everything we've been doing for BBL Supercoach, we're actually going to go much harder on NRL, fantasy, Supercoach, punting, etc. You've got everything coming up for NRL. Cricket stuff. We do other cricketing comps as well. We don't just do the Big Bash, and a bunch of other stuff. It is all free, so just Google Wiki Linktree. Our Discord's on there as well. And one last note I was going to make for anyone who's been obviously please gamble responsibly. But if you have been following our tips, one of my tips was the Strikers about a week and a half ago at 36 to 1 to win the BBL, and they're into about 6 or 7 to 1 now. So yeah, personally, I'll be following the Strikers and hoping they can get up because it'll be a great story to tell. But yeah, realistically, I think it'll be the Sixers.
Last word on Scorchers. Actually, you
Yeah.
talked about how they're missing Jai Richardson and they're missing Ashton Turner, the captain, that the engine room. He's piloted so many run chases. They still got to the finals without him. You know, they've not needed him, and this machine just keeps going on. I realized I started looking this up just before we started, but didn't realize they were on for the three-peat. 22, 23, and now 24.
Ooh,
Um, yeah.
true.
So
Yep.
that's pretty cool. Not as good as
I,
the Panthers, but still pretty good. I think to get there
uh,
without Turner and I mean, Jai Richardson's struggled all season. I think he had an injury coming into the season.
Yeah,
How big a loss will that be? I'm not really sure. Um, Skinazi is not done a ton.
yeah. It's
I feel
just it's
like,
just who's left. Whiteman and Marcus
yeah,
Harris opening the batting for you in a BBL final is really not that
yeah,
intimidating.
yeah.
Go the
It's not like
strikers.
the. Okay, yeah.
No, no, awesome. So, okay, let's move on to Supercoach. I think, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I've actually got some notes sort of listed out here, and I thought we'd go through them point by point. The first thing that it says right at the top is, "Are you happy with your performance?"
Uh, Look, I had a pretty shit ranking to finish off, but I'll still say yes because I think
Hmm.
couple of things. I don't want to go too deep into this now, but when I started, so for the first, I think for about two-thirds of this Big Bash, I was overseas, and it was really hard to sort of make sure I'm on top of everything and making my trades, getting everything right because I wasn't able to watch any of the games. So I'm just going on sort of scores and gut feel, which is not ideal. The one reason why I'm proud of my season is because I started, I'm just looking at now, I had 860 points in the first round and I was ranked 17,800, which is obviously not ideal. And partially it's because the game that was rained out was Scorchers Renegades. And I
Uh,
had, I forgot exactly now, but I
six
did go
years?
hard on Renegades. Yeah. So, like, a lot of people, I think, went hard on the I forgot exactly the details, but essentially, I remember going hard on the Renegades, and obviously, like most people had kind of like split their double gamers, and I'd gone particularly hard on the Gades. And obviously, I know everyone went hard on the Heat, and their game got rained out, but I went even harder on the Heat. So, anyways, you can't blame the rain because everyone's in the same position. I fully get that, but you can blame an abandoned game, which is obviously like super unlikely. So, I was a little
Mm.
bit frustrated, but while I was proud of my season is because I fought back from that and I dragged it to um what it was at six or about 7K, then 2.5, and I kept it around that sort of 1.5K for a couple of rounds. Then it went downhill from there, all the way from 2.8 to ended up at 4,800. But
Mm.
still happy with the way I played it. Fought back from a crap start, played my way, my style for most of the season. And that big drop that I had from about 1,400 all the way down to 4,800, pretty much all of that happened in about a week or so, where I went with one pod captain option. And I was like, I was never going to be happy with the top 3 or 4% or 2% like ranking because I don't play this game for rankings. I play for glory. To at least try to get up to the top 100, 200, something cool, like a cool story to tell. But it went the other
Mm.
way. So yeah, more than happy to live and die by the sword. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a lot happier with how I played this being a super good season with a lot more awareness than I did last season, which is a big win. That's honestly the biggest win to come out of this. I still did some of the silly things that I did last season as well, but I managed to keep them like sort of to a minimum. I think my worst managed to curb my worst habits from last season. Still didn't. I mean, overall, I still didn't do well. 6.2K in the end, but that's 2.7K better than what I did last season. I feel like I'm learning more about Supercoach every day. I feel it's I and this is sort of going on to the next point of my list, where it says best highs and worst lows. How do they affect the course of your season? And for me, I think, best part of it was nailing my captaincies. My judgment was pretty bad in some other respects, but this is the one thing that I did consistently week in, week out. I think like maybe one or two were not the best captaincies going wrong, but most of them were spot on. Like literally game one of the Big Bash, I went straight C on Colin Munro. He made 99, and that was it. It just set me on my season. Captain Matt Short in round two. Obviously, he gunned it because he's Matt Short. I captained, I think, Glenn Maxwell in round five. I also captained Daniel Sams in round four when he got that uh, ridiculous
Oh my god, the 5 far.
five
Yeah.
against the Heat in the first innings. I went straight C on him, got the rewards out of that. Um, I think round seven was the sort of big choice between Hardy and Short because both the Scotchers and the strikers were doubling. I was just sort of thinking about it like, how's it going to be? How's it going to be? I went to short. Like it was very, very close, and like literally like last 10 or 15 minutes before the first lockout, I went for match shot, and that paid off big time. I had a feeling about him. I think for me it came down in that round. It came down to because they were playing each other, right? Strikers and Scorchers. For me, it came down to will I know I feel like they're going to both gun it at home. It's just about which of them will do better at the other's home. And I thought
Yep.
match shot. I think the answer is match shot, and that's exactly what happened. And I thought he was really clever in that round to not bowl himself at Perth Stadium in that game, but he did bowl himself at the Adelaide Oval, and he did well. So I
Mm,
think him, like as a captain, he sort of knows his limits. He knows sort of how to use himself, and I think that was like a very, very sort of clear reading of, hey, I might actually get hammered here,
yep.
and like it could be maybe it's a close game, and let's say if I get hammered for like 25 of my two overs at a ground that's not good for spin, I could lose my team
Mm.
the game here, and he just avoided bowling himself. And it didn't pay off because they lost, but I think it was still the right decision to not bowl himself.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So we're going to move on to how you use stats to help you with your team because I can very confidently say I did not use any stats in my team at any stage of the season. But no, like I think you actually made me realize just then how much I stuffed up the captaincy. So like how do I explain it? So generally, you nailed most of your picks, and I stuffed most of mine up. But I think it goes even deeper than that. So I think like there's one or two, as I said, I was proud because like when everyone was going short V Hardy with 3 rounds to go or whatever, I was like, like my season's already like sort of teetering at that around that top 2-3%. I was ranked around 1.5K at that point, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to be happy with a 1.5 to 2.5K finish or even a 1K
Mm,
finish. Really, I really wanted to go be a hero and sort of when everyone goes short and Hardy, try to go some like a freak performance by bowler and get a fourth, right? So I went Berendorf and that completely backfired, right? But that was what I was proud about, being able to go the pod pick. What I wasn't proud about, half of this is my fault and half of it isn't. So one of the things that I did, which I just remembered, thank you so much for reminding me, is literally I was playing around with my team and like obviously at Wicky, this is our full-time job. We work on this stuff all the time. So we're doing sort of content prep, etc., getting stuff out for the game. I was back in Australia. I was at home. I was watching the games. I was really happy to have all this time playing around with my team. Last minute post toss, I thought, oh wow, I've just like discovered a really smart move here. And while I
mm,
discovered that, while I was sort of literally a split second to be proud of myself and pat myself on the shoulder, I realized it was 7:14 p.m. a minute before the game, and I was like, "Oh, I better put Monroe back into my team so I can fight captaining for my loophole." I did not do that. The game locked out, and that did my head in. So that was one one of the major stuff ups. But I think the other thing, and this is the part that was out of my control, while I was overseas, obviously not being able to watch like pretty much any of the games, one thing I missed was from watching slash not being able to follow it as closely was freaking Bo Webster batting at 3 and actually getting overs. So
mm,
I didn't buy him because I thought, oh, like he doesn't really bowl. Yeah, he's batting at 3, but will he maintain that role? I didn't know for sure, so I didn't trade him in. That was one mistake I
mm,
made, and that cost me pretty like quite a bit. The other mistake with the Stars was I saw Dan Lawrence play his last one or two games, and I was like, holy shit, I forgot who this guy was. This guy's a tall pommy opener, like a Zach Crawley type of batsman, which I love. I loved Kevin Peterson. I love tall English like
yeah.
batsmen. And he bowls like some weird, I don't even know what he bowls, but he bowls like interesting, like whatever the hell he bowls. He's getting a few overs. If I'd watched him play, I probably would have traded him in as well. So there was just a couple
Mm,
of things that are out of my control. And a couple that were. But I think, holy
mm,
shit, like I really took those super risky captain options at the end and went really hard on a few silly things because I'd stuffed up my rank so much. So I think you take the abandoned
mm,
game out, you give me a little bit more time to actually like watch the games, less silly risks at the end, and the rank would have been much different. But you gotta it's super coach versus your real life. So like there's always sacrifices you're gonna have to make, which is completely fine. But yeah, just got me
mm,
super excited for the NRL season because like
mm,
as I told you, I literally got into the sport because of fantasy and super coach. But this season I'm gonna go like I've always gone harder. Like I used to spend hours a day when I was at university in my first couple of jobs. Like literally I used to spend like 4 or 5 hours on forums every day from like 2 months before the season, and then even more when the season started. So I'm so keen to actually do that with our community as well and go all in. But
Yeah.
anyways, let's
Um,
I'll let you do the talking here, sorry, Shana, and go into
yeah.
how you use stats to to help you with your team.
Yeah. Sure. So actually, a couple of things sort of before just to wrap up, just to add to what you said. Um, I think you know. So I'm pretty sure Bo Webster didn't bowl in his first game, which is
Yeah,
why
that
I
that
think
that
people
put
were
people off. Yes. Okay.
exactly, yeah, people like suddenly people became like a lot more cautious about it. And honestly, they were right too, because Stars had both Maxwell and Stonis back for the whole season this time, and they were both bowling. So I guess it was kind of reasonable to think, man, they've got four regular bowlers. They've got Imad Wasim, they've got Maxwell and Stonis, and they have so many bowling options. Will this guy, will Bo Webster actually bowl as much as he has in previous seasons? Because I think it was quite reasonable to think that last season with Maxwell out, with Stonis not really bowling, that Bo Webster's huge role and his like really important bowling role was a result of that. That it was
Yep.
because of him not. Yeah. Anyway, that's it's unreasonable to sort of uh, beat yourself up too much about this.
Oh, sorry, you did remind me. My bad. Yeah. Okay, that makes me feel better. All right, cool.
Okay, so using stats to pick your team, right? So this is interesting because so this is the first time that I've um, done exactly what you've been doing for NRL fantasy for so long, which is like just thinking about it obsessively all the time, planning your trades, looking at numbers. I made those BBL Supercoach player comparison dashboards that you see on the Wiki website and on those Tableau links. I made like I've been using. I helped prep the men's T20 portal. I was looking that up, obsessively researching stats, matchups. Like this is the first time I've been so involved with uh, just using stats for fantasy. Like first time I've ever done it to this extent. Even with all the fantasy that I've played before, with FPL, with IPL fantasy, it's never been this level of involvement. And I think it was also kind of needed because I haven't before last season I hadn't watched the BBL for years, so it's really helpful to have context. Some of these people who I didn't know anything about before until like a year ago, Aaron Hardy or Xavier Bartlett or Matt Short or players like I don't know um, Brody Couch this season before. He's not ended up playing very much, uh, but guys like him, players like that. And I thought it'd be really cool to get into how I use these tools and what sort of my experiences were coming out of it. First thing that sort of came out of it was how do I read my stats that I sort of see on these dashboards and on these portals to inform my picks. What average is good enough versus a particular team or at a particular ground to make a player a good pick. I think this is something that I learned through the course of the season. I think at the start of the season, I would have been willing to sort of say, hey, this guy averages 25 against this particular team. That's good enough. He's a great pick. But I think that sort of very quickly sort of revealed to me that early 20s is a good career average, but it's
Mm,
not a good enough average against a particular team to make him a good pick. You know,
yep.
I think it has to be uh, and this sort of helps you break out of old habits as well, right? Your frame of reference can't be somebody's career average to tell whether somebody is a good pick for a particular game. I think that's something that I've conclusively learned over the course of the season. For a bowling average, it has to be in the teens at the very least. For a batting average, it has to be like 40 plus. I don't think like 27, 28, early 30s. That's not going to cut it. It's got to be something better. And I can sort of give you an example of what I mean by this. So take Ben McDermott for example, favorite example that I love to give. Uh, I noticed that he got a great record against the Adelaide Strikers before this season, and I thought, hey, he's averaging in the 50s. I think that's really, really good. And I'm looking at and that sort of the portal's been updated to include this season's data after he made that 95 against them. And like now he averages 64 against the strikers. And like that's a good pick. That's a very, very good pick based on past records. 64 is good. However, um, he averages 18 against the Brisbane Heat, striking at 116. That's not good enough, regardless of how you spin it. If I look at Tom Rogers, for example, the bowler, he's another sort of example that I sort of love to give out. Um, he averages 24 against the Hobart Hurricanes at an economy of 8.57. That's not good enough, in my opinion, to recommend him as a pick. He does, however, average 12 against the Stars and 8 against the Renegades. That is much more interesting. I feel like your frame of reference has to change depending on how you look at stats breakdowns versus overall numbers.
Yep. And you mentioned in term, sorry, just with the stats you're saying, like, did you find you mentioned like you got sort of more used to it throughout the season, right? So I guess look, just
Mhm.
very quickly, we're going across to NRL season. NRL, like you're new to the concept and you're new to the sport. Um, how do you think that could potentially carry over if if someone's watching this and they've never played NRL Supercoach? How do you think it might translate to that?
So I think it also depends on the scoring system. I think that's the structure that sort of underlies all of these stats and all of the stuff that you pick. So for example, with NRL fantasy, I noticed quite recently, last night, in fact, that um, the difference in points awarded for try assists and tries is much smaller than in NRL Supercoach. So in NRL Supercoach, for example, try scoring is much more valuable than it is in NRL fantasy. Obviously, tries are like very important source of points in both, the most important. But try assists aren't quite as um, they aren't as much less valuable in NRL fantasy as they are in NRL Supercoach, for example.
Yep,
If you've got, so that's like a very simple example that I can sort of throw out there. So if somebody's got a
cool.
good try assist record, it has to be significantly better than their sort of career try assist record or season by
Yep.
season try assist record in order to make me believe that, hey, yes, this is actually a good pick, you know,
Yeah. Well,
something
I
like
think
that.
just one thing I kind of realized while you were talking is like I'm not trying to be condescending at all, but like I think what you would have noticed between this season and last season with Supercoach, like as with anything,
Hmm.
if you're doing something new, you have your biggest improvements or your biggest learnings early on, right? So I'm really
Hmm.
excited already to see how you go with next season of BBL Supercoach. But I think that's the big one with NRL, like because as I said, like I've been so obsessed with it for over a decade now. It's like when people talk about like matchups in NRL or like attacking stats, like I just know the drill of like, dude, like it doesn't matter. NRL is one of those sports where it's super inconsistent. You just need to go off
Hmm.
base stats, the predictable stuff, etc., etc., etc. So, anyways, we'll get into all of that for NRL season. Do you want to go through the last point you said around strategies for the shorter season, etc.?
Yeah, sure. Actually, oh wait, actually, there's a couple of things that I just want to really quickly run through about how overall records don't paint the full picture. So, I've already mentioned that your frame of reference for what constitutes a good record against a particular team or at a particular ground needs to change when you're looking at individual picks for individual rounds in Supercoach or fantasy or whatever. Um, so, Sam Hain at the Hobart Hurricanes, he got two ducks in that round seven double. He ended up with a grand total of 0 points. If you're wondering if someone actually picked him for that double, I am someone. I had him for that double. I traded him in. He got me 0 points for those 2K.
Oh God,
But
torture.
so it's not as crazy as it sort of ended up being. I just want to say that I thought this guy grew up on the Gold Coast. He was born in Queensland. He played for the Heat last season. He had a couple of good games at the Gabba last season. I thought, hey, he's got two games here. He's playing the Heat in one. It's not crazy to think he could replicate some of that form. But if I sort of looked at his, I feel like to some extent, looking at those overall records obfuscated what the actual risk was with playing him. I feel like if I looked at some of his scores from earlier in the from last season or from some of his T20 blast scores or scores in the 100 or earlier in this BBL season, I would have realized, man, that's a lot of single figure scores, like a lot of single figure scores. And I feel like, and knowing me, I don't think that would have really changed my mind about getting Sam Hain, but I feel like had I looked at his entire run of scores and I'd seen so many single digit scores in there, I feel like I would have had a better understanding of the risk involved with that
Yep.
trade than I would have otherwise. Yeah. Okay. Something that changed how I would play the game, strategies for success in the shorter season. So I think two things that really jumped out. One thing that I said would affect our decisions at the start of the season was, man, shorter season, 9 rounds as opposed to 13 or 14. you can't have patience with underperforming players. You have to get rid right away. I feel like I mostly did that. My one exception was James Vince, because I held on to him for quite a while. So the only club that he really did well against was the Stars. He got two big scores against them. They're his favorite BBL team in the last few seasons. Um, got a couple of scores against them. So I held him until the first score he made against the Stars, which was 83 of 55 or whatever. So I had him for that, which is great. Great pick to have for that round. But I feel like I had to suffer through a lot of single digit scores or like low double
Yeah.
digit scores before I got to that point. And that's okay. Like I feel like he was the only one who I persisted with that long. I didn't have as much patience with any of the others. I said, "Hey, you're
Mm.
not performing. You're going straight out of my team." Or I think with some of the guys, because they were low prices to start with, they ended up losing a lot of value, so they were difficult to shift. I feel like
Yeah.
at the very least, I could stick them on my bench and keep them there and say, "No, you're not coming into my team under any circumstances. You're going on my bench and you're going to stay there, and you will
Yeah.
like it."
Yeah. Well, I think yeah, just reading that again, it kind of makes me realize that like generally I was pretty happy with my approach because I think again, my approach at the start was play the fixtures, play like as I do with punting, like always think about opportunity. And also for me is not trying to say, oh, this person is a good batsman at or generally, or this person is a good batsman at this ground, like not being attached to the player or not being attached to like the historical performances and stuff too much, but thinking about the fixtures and the role, right? So that's how I play it. So, for example, like I would always be looping. Like that's always my approach. So, like generally, I was really happy in the early rounds because I played the fixtures hard. I had was it Heat, Gade, Scorchers, or whoever the three teams that were at least doubling or tripling, whatever. Started my team well, didn't work out because of the rain and the match abandoned. That's okay. Got a significant ranking increase. I kept playing the fixtures, and the only time it kind of all unraveled, I guess, was like I still stuck to my guns mostly, but then it freaking the last game of the round rained out when I had five thunder as well. So I think like I don't think I would change anything significantly. Uh, the only thing I probably would have done is just sort of like nail that VC and looping just a little bit more. Where like the odd time I ended up having to. No, sorry. The one thing I would change is towards the end of the season, I got super desperate and I just went, no, I won't trade this player in because they're really popular. So no matter what, I'm just going to go someone else. That's when it started costing me because like Ben McDermott went nuts. I love Ben McDermott. He's a super high ceiling player. He's the type of guy
Mm,
like I would love, but then I didn't pick him just because he was popular, went some other way, and that's just not how I play. So I think it's just I just got desperate towards the end, and it cost me ranks, which isn't great. So I think next year I would just be like, stick to your guns the whole time. Don't get too stressed. And if I'm ever in a position in NRL, BBL, whatever it is, if I do get to the top 100, 200, and I have like some sort of chance at actually winning the whole thing, then maybe I'll look at like a little bit like some slightly different moves. But I think next year I'm just going to stick
mm,
to my guns. It's such a small chance you're ever going to get to the top 50 or top 100, right? So I'm just going to play the game my
mm.
way. So at least I don't have regrets at the end of it. Because I do regret a couple of things at the end there where I just did pick guys because they're
Uh,
popular. A bit silly.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, makes sense. I think honestly, like, and it's with the Ben McDermott's popularity really comes down to inertia. I think he was a cheap
Mm,
wicketkeeper to start the season. Everybody bought him and stuck him on their bench, thinking, yeah, okay, this guy is sort of like going to rise in value. I'm going to get something out of him. But they ended up holding him until like six, or like until he doubled in seven, which made perfect sense to start him then. And that's exactly what they did. And he gunned it. I will say about Ben McDermott though, it's been I was sort of like I knew like, man, this guy's inconsistent. He's a frustrating pick. He's this, he's that. There's never a dull moment with him at the crease. It is so much fun to watch him and follow along. I think
yeah.
even when he fails, at least he puts you out of your misery soon. But there's never a dull moment, right? It's always like an inside edge that's running away for four, or there's like he just hits a ball in the air and you're just praying it's not going anywhere near a fielder, or he just
Yeah.
like or he just looks like $1 million, man. He just like trashes the fast bowling and he just hits all that part-time spin and he just like yeah. I think for the joy of playing the game, there's few that I've enjoyed watching more than McDermott in all the fantasy cricket that I've played.
No, awesome. Okay, well, we'll get on to our plans for the next few months, especially with fantasy and supercoach in a second. But I guess firstly, like if you are listening to the very end, a big thank you to Shane. We'll obviously say this in our work chats after this, but I think it's been really cool. Like if you guys have watched or read or watched anything to do with BBL Supercoach, unless it's been some ridiculously stupid sort of silly take, everything else will probably be have been to Shane. So all the articles that
I
you've
have made
seen.
plenty of silly takes. Don't worry. Like we've
Okay,
not
fine.
had
You
time to
might.
get into my bad calls. Well, obviously you will have bad calls when you put like right articles and sort of like try to
Yeah.
preview games and run down all your picks, etc. But
Yep.
yeah,
No, it's been really cool. So for context,
a lot
guys,
of those
so
work though.
Shane's yeah, well, so Shane's background is he could be a cricket writer one day, and I'm sure he will be if he wants to be. But his background is more on that side. So having to learn super coach, starting to play with play with stats, and then also watching the big back. These things are all foreign to him. So he's put in a lot of time over the BBL season. A lot of the content, or almost all the content that you would have seen, would have been from him. So yeah, big thank you to Shane. I guess we'll be in a different position come NRL season because I'll be able to actually make
Yeah.
some more sensible takes.
I'm just gonna say like one. I mean, thanks for doing the pods with me. I mean, you're way better at Supercoach than I am. First of all, you played it a lot more, and you watched more of the BBL, and of course, we're going to see a role reversal very, very soon where all the sense is coming from you and I'm just going to be the one just saying, "Nah, man, it's okay. This like I'm sure about like this crazy pod that's like less than 1% owned. I'm just take the captaincy on him."
No,
But
it'll actually be a good
one last
balance
thing
though.
that I wanted,
Oh, go on. Yep.
yeah, yeah. One last thing that I wanted to say, which I realized like it's sort of they both concern the same player. Just one last thing about BBL Supercoach. Um, one thing that I did learn about what the men's T20 portal is good for is that's a general player stats portal. That's not really meant for fantasy or super coach or anything like that. But there are a couple of drop downs in there. Most like the venue and the team drop downs, especially, which are like most useful for fantasy. I found the batter versus bowler type. That's another drop down that I found somewhat useful. For example, just in terms of evaluating threats for your picks and so on. But the venue and the team drop downs are the ones that are most useful. One thing I realized is what the portal is actually good for is it's good for backing up, let's say, common sense picks
Mm,
or like backing up your hunches or sort of investigating whether your feeling about somebody is backed up by numbers. And I've got
yep.
the perfect example for this. So I mentioned Tom Rogers earlier in the show, and for so the Renegades were doubling in round three. I remember second double of the season, and they were at Hobart. They were playing Blunts. They were playing at Blunston, and I sort of looked at him and said, I just looked up his numbers at Blunston. And I was like, man, bowling average in the low teens, economy under six. This guy is such a good pick for this round. He's got a double, one of those games as a banker. And you don't really need a player stats portal to know that this could be a good pick because Tom Rogers used to be a hurricane. He's bowled a lot in this ground. So he's most likely bowled well and you'll have a good enough sample size. So you don't need a player stats portal to know that. What you could find like the portal helpful for is knowing how good he was at that ground. Like,
Mm.
so it's not an average in the early 20s, it's an average in the low teens. It's like 11 or 12 with an economy of 5.8. And even now, after this season, his record there is 11 wickets at 13 and an economy of 6.26 since 2020. So that's a very, very good record. However, I tried to be too clever. I said, "Nah, man, I don't want Tom Rogers. That's just for this. That's too mainstream. I'm gonna go Mark Steketee. He's got a double now. He's got a double in round five. I want those two. I want those four games out of him." Naturally, Tom Rogers took two wickets. Mark Steketee got hit for none for 43 of 3 overs in the first game and was dropped for the second game. So shows you how like all of us are just like 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 all of us might have the right thoughts, but not all of us have good judgment.
No, 100%. Look, it was an awesome season, a really like a big roller coaster ride for us. A lot of fun though. Like we did the pods, we did the articles, we got a lot more
Yeah.
engagement from the community. It was really good fun, and yeah, nice little 6 7 weeks that we spent doing all of this. But look, let's very quickly, guys. As I said before, if you Google Wiki Link Tree, you'll find the links to our pods, our data tools, our content, our Discord, everything, and it's all free. I'll very quickly wrap up with a couple of thoughts around this upcoming NRL season. So our company has been around for just less than 4 years. A lot of our social media and content and stuff has been going on for about 2 or 3 years, roughly. And last year was the year that our Discord went from 300 to 3,000. really quickly we exploded, and yeah, we've got 3 full-time marketing people now. So Shane's one of them. We've got 2 others, putting a lot of effort into podcasts, putting a lot of effort into a whole bunch of other stuff. So we're going to go really, really hard at the NRL season, probably from about early February, probably the second week of February onwards. We'll start our podcast. We're going to start to do a lot more collaboration with different people from different communities, get them on board, chat all things fantasy and Supercoach. A lot of people probably know us for rugby league and punting, and that's how community grew. We're going to launch all of that stuff just like last season and go really hard to put a lot more effort in for the community as well. So whether it's fantasy, Supercoach, punting, or just rugby league in general, we're going to have more than enough content for you guys, and almost all of it will be free except for some really niche punting stuff. But yeah, as I said, almost all of it will be free. And we're also going to start covering some AFL. So we'll have an AFL goal scorer odds comparison tool. The NRL one is obviously super popular. And we're sort of looking out for people to do collabs with for fantasy and Supercoach. Sorry, for AFL Supercoach. So if you do play BBL Supercoach, but you also happen to be sort of involved in AFL Supercoach and you have been for a while, or maybe you already create content for that, we've got a team to edit our podcast and sort of help us out with content. So if you're keen to jump on the AFL sort of an AFL Supercoach podcast with us, reach out at Twitter, Insta, or jump onto our Discord. It is all free. Reach out to us. We're just basically we're going all in on on all things content and data for especially for Aussie sport. But yeah, I think that's it. So Shane, if you want to sign off, yeah.
Yeah, just micro fantasy and Supercoach plans will be back very, very soon with a fantasy Supercoach podcast, like the 2 of us. You'll hear one person talking a lot of sense about rugby league, one person talking no sense at all. But we're going to be back with that soon. Might do some preseason pods, see how that goes. I've made NRL fantasy and Supercoach teams with a couple of interesting names. With so my Supercoach team is called I Can See Clearly, and my fantasy team's called Kipax Good, Ponting Better, Bradman Best.
Love it. Well,
So,
you've almost won the prize for best team name already.
yeah.
No, awesome. Cool. But anyways, so Shane, it was good fun doing this with you. If you have been following on, guys, we're at that stage where we've been around, as I said, 3 or 4 years. But in terms of like our community and our following, it's still relatively small. I think we get like 100 or 200 people checking this potty out. And with everything that we're doing, it's all, it's still sort of like a couple of hundred people at most. So we really appreciate you guys. I hope we sort of, entertained you and also helped you out a little bit with your teams. I hope you guys did better than us. But otherwise, we'll catch you in a little bit. Thanks to Shane and thanks everyone else.